Do you think that's a good backup solution to go out into space, sort of to avoid the possibility of humans destroying themselves completely here on Earth?
Well, I think, I want to be always careful with that because, like I said, it's centuries that we're talking about,
Yes.
right? So, the problem with climate change, and same with nuclear war, it's breathing down our necks now. So it's not trying to establish a base on Mars is going to be so hard that it is not even going to be close to being self-sufficient for a couple of, a century at least. So it's not like a backup plan now. We have to solve the problem of climate change. We have to deal with that. There's still enough nuclear weapons to really do horrific things to the planet for human beings. So I don't think it's like a backup plan in that way. But I do think, like I said, it's the prize. It's, if we get through this, then we get the entire solar system to sort of play around in and experiment with and do really cool things with.
Well, I think it could be a lot less than a couple of centuries if there's a urgency, like a real urgency, like a catastrophe, like maybe a small nuclear war breaks out where it's like, holy shit, this is for sure a bigger one is looming.
Yeah.
Maybe if geopolitically the war between China and the United States escalates, where there's this tension that builds and builds and builds, and it becomes more obvious that we need to really, really, really accelerate.
Yeah. I think my only dilemma with that is that I just think that a self-sufficient base is so far away that, like, say you start doing that, and then there is a full-scale nuclear exchange. That base is, it's not going to last because it's just, the self-sufficiency requires a kind of an economy, like literally a material economy that we are so far from with Mars, that we are centuries from. Like I said, 3 centuries, which is not that long, 2 to 3 centuries. Look at 1820. Nobody had traveled faster than 60 miles an hour unless they were falling off a cliff, right? And now we routinely travel at 500 miles an hour. But it is sort of centuries long. So that's why I think we'd be better off trying to solve these problems than, I just think the odds that we're going to be able to create a self-sufficient colony on Mars before that threat comes to head is small. So we'd have to deal with the threat.
Yeah, it's an interesting scientific and engineering question of how to create a self-sufficient colony on Mars or out in space as a space habitat, like where Earth entirely could be destroyed, you could still survive.
Yeah. Because it's really about, thinking about complex systems, right? A space habitat, would have to be as robust as an ecosystem, as the kind of thing, you go out and you see a pond with all the different webs of interactions. That's why I always think that, if this process of going out into space is actually will help us with climate change and with thinking about making a long-term sustainable version of human civilization. Because you really have to think about these webs, the complexity of these webs, and recognize the biosphere has been doing this forever. The biosphere knows how to do this, right? And so, how do we build a vibrant, powerful technosphere that also doesn't, mess with the biosphere's capacity to support our technosphere. So, by doing this, by trying to build space habitats, in some sense, you're thinking about building a small scale version of this. So I think the two problems are going to kind of feed back on each other.